Well, welcome everybody. I would say happy Friday, but these days I'm not sure I actually know what day of the.
Okay.
Brad, I can't hear him.
Yep. I'm just
And I
texting
don't
him.
see
Go
our-
ahead, Charles.
our
Go ahead,
slide
Charles.
presentation.
Go ahead, Charles, if you want to.
Should I launch right in?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay.
Charles, can you not hear me?
I cannot, unfortunately. I don't think.
Okay.
I'm not sure that anybody could. Hey, and Brad, can you put up the PowerPoint? I'm not seeing it.
Okay. How's that?
I don't know why I can't see it, but
Okay. I believe it's up. Everybody else see it?
I got it. See
I
ya.
can see it.
Okay.
let me. Brad, I'm just going to try to log on to that one more time. Do you mind here?
No problem. We're going to take a pause, everybody. Tell me when you're ready, Charles.
Okay, it's saying if nothing prompts for project launching.
Scott, if you, yeah, little technical difficulties, everybody, no worries.
Scott, do you see the PowerPoint?
It's locked for me, Charles. Can you hear me?
Yeah, mine's locked too. It just says launching.
Right. That's where I'm at. And it says, Brad, I think it's your screen. It says you're have an unstable connection. At least that's what I'm seeing.
Okay, how's that, guys? Okay, I'm good, and we were good coming up to this point, but
I can just launch in. I don't need the prompts if everybody else can see it.
Hey, Charles, good picture.
Hey, Michael.
Love that picture. And even and in flesh, even better.
Here I am.
I mean, it's video. This is virtual reality, but I'm going to take it as to me, it's the real deal.
Yeah. I enjoyed your Molesworth discussion yesterday.
hey, Michael,
Thank you.
Can you see the PowerPoint presentation?
I just see like a thumbnail of a barrel room with some light on it, and that just disappeared.
Okay. Interesting.
Always the
Hey,
one
Brad,
to-
should we just all cancel out and sign in?
Then everybody, yeah, that's probably going to be the only way we can do it, which is really interesting why it's not projecting. Yeah, I think, I don't know. I think I see everybody's saying they can see the PowerPoint and you can see Charles.
Okay. All right. Well, if that's so, I can
Yeah.
just launch.
Let's go ahead, Charles. Go ahead.
So, Scott, thanks for the little introduction. I know you had more words to deliver. These are times where I think we just all have to be adaptable. That's certainly what I'm learning. A year ago today, I was on day 12 of a 60-day national tour in that old Cadillac, the 20th anniversary. And this time couldn't be, these days, these next 48 days could not be more different. And I'm so thankful to be in this wine community, to have even these moments, which seem so imperfect, but so meaningful for me. I'm sure like all of you, I feel like a caged animal. I'm dying to get out in the market. I'm dying to be with my my growers in the wineries where, you know, in the Northern Hemisphere, bud break's happening and the new season begins. And you know, and Southern Hemisphere harvests are just wrapping up. So anyway, thanks for joining. You know, the idea is to talk about some of the wines that are most important to me, and the inspiration behind them, and but probably to set that up, I should talk just a little bit about the beginning, the history, and I think most everybody knows these stories at this point. So I'll zoom through it. So in 1992, my dad had moved to Europe, and he tasted a wine called Domaine Trevelin, which actually I happened to have drunk last night. It's a red wine. It's a Cab Syrah blend. And he was so moved by it that the next day he started the hunt within Provence to find a place to buy some vineyards and start a little winery. And he did that. My dad was from the finance world. He had no wine credentials, but Trevelin showed him that Provence could make world-class wine, and he just he was on a mission. He bought a little property called Chateau Routas, Routas, and that same year, 92, and he hired a few people to help him farm and teach him how to make wine, and he was off to the races. Fall of 92 was the first vintage. And of course, as you do in Provence, he was specifically in Coteau Varois. As you do in Provence, of course, you make a lot of rosé. His focus was red, but you got to make rosé. That's what you do there. And he actually had a pretty good knack for it, and was making some pretty compelling wines right away, but was having a heck of a time selling it. Nobody wanted it. Provence was not an established category at all. Red, white, rosé outside of Provence. Even within France, Provence was thought of as very secondary, and he proceeded to just build inventory year in, year out. The wines were getting better, but he was struggling. So in 1998, he called me and begged me to help him for 1 year. I had actually at the time no interest in the wine industry. I had been I'd been studying environmental economics. I had written papers on federal land policy and had spent time in DC lobbying how to manage Forest Service projects, et cetera. And I was super inspired by that. But my dad said, hey, listen, 1 year after this, you can return to do this academic pursuit and this policy pursuit, but just give me 1 year. I need some help. So my start was really all about hustling, was all about trying to get his wine out there. I really didn't know much. I had no expertise in winemaking or viticulture or sales for that matter, but I was young and stupid and had a bunch of energy and launched into it. And I saw, I realized quickly that I needed some sort of gimmick, some sort of something to give myself an opportunity to get a meeting with a wholesaler or to get a meeting with a retailer or restaurant to tell the story of what we were doing. The wines were quite serious, and I wanted to talk about that, but I needed a hook, and that's where the Cadillac came in. 65 pink Cadillac DeVille. I bought 3 vintage pink tuxedos, and in 99 I hit the road with wine in the trunk and knocking on wholesalers' doors, and those were really hard, humbling days. So I learned a lot though, and started spending more time in the winery over the years, and started to meet amazing people like Joel Gott and like Charles Smith and like the Trinqueros, and really they have all the people included have been my mentors these subsequent years. Three Thieves was started in 2002, was the first vintage. 2003 was when it came out. It was a was a 1 liter jug. For those of you who remember, post 9/11, the high-end wine market collapsed, and there was so much amazing juice out there that could be purchased for nothing. And Joel and I and Roger thought it would be hilarious to put it in the vessel that represented cheap and bad. And that's how Three Thieves started, a 1 liter jug of Zinfandel. And some people got it. A lot of people thought it was ridiculous, and we focused on college towns, but it really sparked something and generated this relationship with Joel and Roger, and that led to the relationship with Trinchero, which started in 2005. Along the way, my dad's original winery, I after year one, I was sort of officially off duty. My dad's mission was complete, but I love this industry, everything about it, the people, everything from the viticulture to the sales and marketing and everything in between. And I was hooked, and so in 2005, when Rutas was starting to establish itself, my dad had an opportunity to sell the property, which was never really the mission, but it was at a point where he was finally starting to get past this. He was making lots of losses in the early years, and he was starting to come around, and the rosé market was starting to establish itself, and his red wines were starting to get some renown, and somebody offered to buy it, made a great offer, and my dad took it. And at that time, Three Thieves had already started, but I wanted to continue on with my dad, and I wanted to continue on with what we'd started with Rutas in Provence. So we had this neat opportunity to sort of reassess things, if knowing what we'd learned over the years, knowing that you could see the spark in rosé. 2005 in the really outside of France, rosé was still a tiny market, and very few people really were excited about it, but you could see the momentum, and my dad and I decided that we needed to continue what we'd started. And we with the singular focus being rosé, we wanted to find vineyards that were most suitable just for that. And for us, Côte de Provence, which is the majority of the Provence appellation, of the Provence region rather, represents over 70% of production. For us, it was already clear that with each progressively warmer vintage, the tension and the acidity, particularly on the warm years, wasn't quite happening in the way that we thought was interesting. So we sought out the latest ripening, the highest elevation parts of Provence, and that's Aix-en-Provence. We didn't, go to Aix because we thought it was beautiful, though it is. We didn't go to Aix because that was, the only place where we knew where we knew growers, where we could get fruit. We went there very specifically because we wanted to focus on rosé and make a very specific style. And it was there that for us, it was clear that for the long term, we could make really dynamic rosé. So 2005, Bieler Père et Fils started. It was the same year that my daughter Sabine was born, which is why we call the wine Sabine. And we launched in, and it's the characteristics, elevation is a key one. For those of you who can see the PowerPoint, you'll see a photo of a vineyard with the Mont Ventoux in the background. Côte d'Aix-en-Provence, our appellation, surrounds that mountain, sort of at a higher level bench. We pick on average 3 weeks later than Côte de Provence. There are, of course, exceptions within Côte de Provence, later ripening, and I'm not meaning to disparage Côte de Provence at all. There's lots of wonderful wines. 3 weeks ago, there was a pretty major frost and actually even some snow. Côte de Provence definitely was affected. There'd already been bud break, and I would imagine it's going to have a fairly a small crop. We'll see how it shakes out. Coteaux d'Aix, bud break had not happened, and it's pretty unaffected. So it's really a cooler, later ripening area. It's all limestone. The varietals planted, historically, there was quite a lot of Syrah Grenache. We've been, over the years, planting more and more Cinsault, which is a standard in Côte de Provence, Coteaux d'Aix. There's been very little planted. It's a grape that takes a little bit more heat to ripen well, and historically hasn't ripened that well there, but it's very much starting to. We've been planting more and more Roll. Roll is also known as Vermentino in Italy. And we find that it adds a spicy richness to the wine. And as long as we co-ferment with the red grapes, we can include white grapes. So this is across Provence. This isn't strictly Coteaux d'Aix. You can't just make white wine and blend it in. You have to co-ferment with red grapes. We're actually even starting to experiment with, in a very small way, because everybody's scared, but we're experimenting with Mourvèdre, which is a varietal that no one ever thought could possibly ripen. It requires much more heat. We'll see how that goes. Probably for red wine up in Aix, Mourvèdre won't be, well, I don't know, perhaps down the road that it'll show promise even for red, but with a focus on rosé, where we're not looking for big power and alcohol, we're looking for savory and that blood orange quality, etc. So, when it comes to Bieler Perry-Fils Savine, there are a few things that I think are important to note. Again, elevation, later ripening. So again, elevation gives us cooler nights. We retain more acidity. The peak heat of the day is probably pretty comparable with Côte de Provence. There's this later ripening, as I mentioned, so we're able to develop flavors over a longer period, which I think results in more dynamic flavor development. And this is more of just a commercial comment, but an important one. You'll of course notice that our rosé is quite a bit less expensive than pretty much all the other Provence rosés on the market. So it would be easy to conclude that somehow we are cutting corners. Somehow our fruit is inferior, and that's not at all the case. Our cost of goods, winemaking wise, is really no different than a Whispering Angel for the most part. The difference is we don't have a fancy embossed glass bottle. We don't sponsor polo tournaments. We're not we're not buying loads of ads. We put our marketing in the bottle and sell it at a fair cost. I remember back in the beginning when value was such a key component of getting anybody to try rosé for the first time, and remembering that, value remains just a key part of our program. And while Miraval and Whispering Angel and all the others are closer to $20 and above, you see loads of new entry at that price point. I think because people think that they can. So don't think that our prices are any less because we're doing anything differently. I would argue that we're even more hardcore about it. There's really no winery that I'm aware of that's over 50,000 cases that is farming consistently the same vineyards year in, year out, and controlling every single fermentation as we do. Generally speaking, the larger producers are doing a lot of blending from across a broad region, relying on other wineries to make the wine for them. Of course, that's not the case on the smaller estates, but for the larger producers. So we have a real ability to start our blend based on our pick times, based on each fermentation. There's a photo that you'll see in the deck that's my dad and I in front of, I think it's 32 different bottles. Each bottle, that's a blending session.
Yeah, that's the page we're on right now, Charles.
Okay, great. So, that's each one represents a different fermentation. In some cases, we're taking the same vineyard and carbonating, putting it into 4 different tanks or 3 or however we decide, and using different yeasts and different fermentation techniques to send the flavors in different directions. So it's, you know, that's like I say, our blending really starts early. We want a diverse spectrum of flavor, such that, and maybe on its own, each individual piece is not thrilling on its own, but once you piece it back together, you have this incredibly broad, complex flavor profile. You know, some of the darker, you'll see one of the bottles in that lineup is particularly dark in color. That would be, and there are, I think there are a few of those, that would be a press lot. So that's, you know, most everything we're doing is free run, and then some of the darker tanks are press lots.
Charles, there's a question on about screw caps as a commercial choice, or was that what was your decision there?
You know, originally with Bieler Préfils Sauvignon, we were under a cork, and I ultimately felt that with the rosé that we're producing in X, we're really trying to capture a moment, capture the freshness of that moment. I'm not looking for huge evolution in the wine, and I feel that screw cap best captures that moment. You know, you'll notice with our Bandol, we do use a cork, and the reason for that is I like the evolution that Bandol has, and I think actually, and I really want to encourage it, and I feel the oxygen exchange under cork better allows that development. So it's not strictly a sales marketing thing. It's really a decision based on the experience that I want the consumer to have when they open that bottle.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions on Photodex?
Other than you're being modest, Charles, your wine kicks whispering angels and exclamation point.
They have a style, and you know, I respect what they've done. And you know what, they brought a lot of excitement to rosé, and my gosh, I could never have imagined the rosé category being as big as it is today, as you know, with such an excited audience, not just in North America, but across the globe. And they've played a real part in that. So I salute them for what they've done, and they brought average prices up, and so they play a really important role, and I'm not a hater.
No,
so one other thing I guess I'll mention, something that we've been doing increasingly in the winery. So 2018 to 2019, there was not that much different. They were crushingly hot summers, very dry in both cases. The results from the fruit was not wildly different. So I think the differences in the wines from vintage to vintage has more to do with the increased amount of Cinsault and roll in the blend, as well as something that we've been doing in the winery experimenting with the last 4 or 5 years, and that's fermenting the wine with solids. So typically, when you press fruit, you put it in the tank, you bring the temperature of the tank down to just above freezing, and solids fall to the bottom, and you take the clean juice off the top and you ferment that clean juice. That's what you do with white wine. That's what you do with rosé traditionally. We started experimenting with keeping the solids that fall to the bottom in the wine throughout the entire fermentation, and in fact, stirring those solids before fermentation starts. So keeping them in suspension as a way to build more palate richness. And it sort of acts similarly to like batonnage or lees stirring, but I find adds another dimension. It feels more cohesive to me. And we're not looking for heavy fat mid palate profile, but a bit more depth to me is interesting. And so we've loved the results. And at this point, about 60% of the wine is fermented in that way, and that's double last year. And it's probably something that we're going to continue to do because we're big fans. Very so moving along to Bandol, It was 5 years ago. I had the opportunity to work with a vineyard down there. My dad's original consultant winemaker at Rutas back in the beginning was a guy named Luc Sorin from who lived in Bandol and made some beautiful red wines and rosé. And I always marveled from the very beginning how spectacular his wines were and how infinitely better they were than ours at Rutas. And I'd always hoped one day to have the opportunity to work with some fruit down there, and eventually got the opportunity. It's a vineyard in the town of Le Plan de Castellet, which is so Bandol. For those of you who don't know, it's right on the coast. Côte d'Aix is about 100 kilometers inland, like I said, on high elevation, on a ridge. It's less, Côte d'Aix is not that sea influence. Bandol is right on the sea. It's an amphitheater that faces the Mediterranean, and really a unique part of Provence, and makes very distinctive wines, largely because there's a great Mourvèdre, which grows beautifully there. And it historically has not grown that well as you head north. It needs a lot of heat to ripen. And Bandol has an early year bud break. It's a warmer growing season. Harvests start a little bit earlier. Everything starts in advance. And anyway, so when I had the opportunity to work with this fruit, I took it immediately. The vineyard is on and there are a couple of photos there. You'll see a photo of a vineyard with the Mediterranean right there. So the vines are bathed in sea fog pretty much every morning. So there's always a real salinity to the wines, and it's to me, that's not so much a soil thing. That's transfer through the air from the sort of salty sea air. It's our it's Mourvèdre, Grenache, Cinsault. Those are the principal grapes. There's almost no Syrah, and on our vineyard there's no Syrah planted at all. You don't really see Syrah at all in Bandol. And the challenge in Bandol when it comes to rosé is that with these warmer and warmer vintages, these are vineyards that you are not allowed to irrigate. There's advanced and earlier ripening, and you don't want high alcohol rosé. You want to retain freshness. You want some fruit, but you don't want too much fruit. I must say, long-term Bandol as a world-class rosé producing region worries me, because I think we're starting to move out of it. It's moving into a zone where you can make more consistent, hearty, ripe red wine. I think it's still a beautiful spot to make this like richer, denser, spicier kind of rosé. I often describe it as this blood orange, herbe de Provence kind of balance. There's this exotic fruit component. It's always a little darker. Everything's direct to press, just as we do in Provence, and at least in Aix, and we're making the wines quite similarly. But we are having to pick earlier and earlier to retain acidity and keep the alcohols from getting out of control. So long term, to me, this is something that we need to love and savor now. In 10 plus, 10, 15, 20 years, I think, except for in the cooler vintages, maybe we won't have this opportunity. So this is a moment in time to savor. The 19 is on the way, and should be hitting your markets very soon. Unfortunately, we can't bottle until March 1st, so it's always a later release. And while there's always this rush to show the new vintages of rosé, Bandol is one of the few rosés, I'm speaking just generally, that probably hits its stride in the fall. And so while get out there and show it, do know that it has an extended lifespan. And there shouldn't be the panic that if by the end of the summer there's still some left. That's okay. And in fact, that's probably the moment where most people should be appreciating it. You know, we were lucky enough to be acknowledged by the Wine Spectator as a top 100 last year, which was a heck of an honor. And so I salute them for that acknowledgement. Brad, any questions on Bandol that you can think of that you see?
There's none in the chat bar,
Okay.
but yeah.
Okay. So so move along to La Jacine.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So, you know, over the years, so 2005 was the first Bieler Fils rosé, and pretty quickly it had a good following, and I had people asking me all the time, Charles, you make a beautiful rosé. Why isn't there also a red wine to go with it? Fair question. Our focus was rosé, and we picked our vineyards to make the style of rosé we wanted. But I thought, let's give it a go. And so 2008, 2009, 2010, we did try to make, we did make red wine off these Cotodex vineyards. And you know what? The red sucked. It really proved out that, I gotta shut my box here. It proved out that these, you know, our program, all of our decisions were most suited for making the kind of rosé that we were producing, and the reds were a little bit lean and a little bit hard, and we could bring the yields down, and you know, they were crunchy. They had some charm. We liked them, but sucked is a little bit hard. But it was not what I was hoping for. If we brought the yields down, it was going to increase costs, and I'm so value obsessed. I abandoned it, and for years just said, you know, we're going to focus on rosé. Until I was introduced in early 2015 to some vineyards about 70 kilometers north in a town called Valréas. Some friends of mine, the Lavaux brothers, who live in Gigondas, they had been quietly buying up a ton of land in this town of Valréas that honestly I knew was a Côte d'Aron village, but it was a village that I didn't know much about, and the little I knew and had heard about was that it was maybe one of the weakest, you know, historically the weakest villages, made the least compelling wines. And you know, over the years when I'd heard that my friends Frederick and Benoit Lavaux were buying up there, and I like, guys, you know, what are you doing? I don't really understand your approach here. Why would you be investing there? And they said, you know, come and visit sometime, and I think you'll understand. So I eventually took them up on it, and it all became so clear. So first of all, it's not, so Côte d'Aron, Côte d'Aron village specifically, Valréas is the town. It is not on the valley floor. It's on a hill on the edge of the valley. So immediately, you know, they're cooler nights. It's slightly cooler climate relative to that area. But what I hadn't really keyed in on was its varietal makeup. This is the northern tip of the Southern Rhone. So the Southern Rhone, when it comes to red wine, is Grenache dominated. The Northern Rhone, of course, is Syrah dominated. And why you see a shift from Grenache to Syrah is not just a preference of the vigneron. It has everything to do with the ripening window. At a certain point, Grenache, which needs a lot more heat, doesn't ripen that well. And Syrah, which needs less heat, becomes the dominant varietal. And Valréas is that line, is that breaking point historically. And Valréas was always dominant on Grenache, with some Syrah planted to support it. But what was happening was that in these progressively warmer, drier vintages, for the first time in its history, Valréas was starting to ripen Grenache really well. And yet, you know, my opinion is the great wines of the world are from where the grapes just barely ripen into their potential. And that was what was happening more consistently in Valréas, with Grenache as the lead. And so that year, I dove in, working with the Lavaux brothers and their vineyards. La Jacine is a mix of two soil types. It's detected, we think of it as a single vineyard, but it's really broken into two parts. One is a riverstone gallet part, and another part of it is limestone. It's all dry farmed. They could actually put water on it if they wanted to, but that they don't have any, there's no irrigation up there. It is largely Grenache. But there are some rows of Syrah also. We're picking by machine in the La Jacine case, but in a very rough manner, encouraging some stems to drop in. We are also throwing, once the fruit gets to the winery, we're throwing stems from other grapes coming in that were spun off. We're putting it back in. So we're trying to achieve about a 30–40% level of whole cluster within the wine. We are fermenting natively. The fermentations last about 25–30, well, fermentation is about 14 days. We're leaving it on its skins for another 10 to 14 days to draw out a bit more palate depth. We lose a little primary fruit, but you gain a lot of texture and non-fruit aspects, earth level, leather, that sort of spectrum. We love that. And all of it's concrete fermented, concrete aged, and it's this fruit on the edge of its ripening window allows power. So there's some great dark fruit, but also you get the acidity, you get the freshness, you get this sort of crunchiness that I think is interesting. So it's been a real revelation. 15 was that first vintage, and the results have been more exciting actually than I anticipated, and we've been lucky enough to get a number of nice scores from the Spectator and beyond. And it's a program that I have been spending much more time with because it's fun and we're all learning, and there's actually a related wine to it that we'll talk about at the end. But so this is Bieler Père Fils La Jacine. La Jacine is the name of my dad's property in Gigondas. It's not where the fruit comes from. It just happens to be where he lives, and his property is called La Jacine, which is essentially a stone hut where it's a Provençal word. It's a stone hut where a shepherd might overnight. So it's, I guess, a cabin.
Very good.
Yeah.
Thank you, Charles.
Sure.
People are saying they love the package on it. So.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So there's been some evolution there. We decided that it was quite distinct from from what we were doing in X. We should really divide our program into keep the traditional label with what we're doing with rosé in Provence, and the Rhone have a different approach.
Very good. Move into Charles and Charles.
Okay. So I guess I'm talking too much, and I need to speed these things up, which
it's okay.
Unfortunate, because there's so much good stuff to say. I mean, the background here was that in the mid 2000s, when we started seeing rosé as a category in the United States that people were getting excited about, I wasn't seeing much of a response with U.S. wineries and their rosé program, and I was always puzzled by it. You know, in Provence, you could so easily make a lovely balanced rosé that, and it could happen quite easily, and yet. What I was seeing in the United States was this big emphasis on fruit and not enough on that balance between fruit, acid, savory. And so I started studying maps and looking at terroir, looking at temperature, looking at cost of fruit, because again, I'm a value guy. You know, there are some great cooler site vineyards all over California, but it tends to be the hilltops, and that tends to be some of the most expensive fruit that there is. For me, it wasn't great wine at any cost. I wanted to be able to be in the zone where we were with Bieler. So that led me first to Oregon, like, okay, Pinot Noir can make an interesting rosé, cooler climate, but the costs of fruit for me were still higher than I thought was reasonable and that's what led me to Washington, and not, I didn't wake up one day and say, I want to make wine in Washington. I wanted to make a very specific style of rosé, and all indications were that Washington State, much cooler climate, a huge growing region with lots of diversity in varietals. Not much Grenache planted because it's too cold. A lot of Syrah because remember Syrah doesn't need as much heat. Probably down the road in the future, we'll see more and more Grenache in Washington. It just seemed like the spot where we could make dynamic, world-class, balanced rosé. And the only guy I knew was Charles. And as I'm sure everybody knows the story, I called him and I explained what I wanted to do. And I said, hey, listen, if we should do this together, or, you can point me in the direction of a grower, because I didn't know any growers up there. And he's like, oh no, we gotta do this. So that was 2008. And first couple years, all we made was rosé. It was from, we went out and found Syrah vineyards, because again, we couldn't find any Grenache, because it was really hardly any planted still today. It doesn't ripen well. But we went after growers who'd planted Syrah in too cold a place, and they couldn't sell the fruit to anybody who wanted to make red wine. And for us, that was perfect for making this sort of savory kind of rosé that I was interested in making anyway. And over the years, we built on that. And at this point, all of our rosé vineyards are above 1,000 feet in elevation, which doesn't seem very high, but there's only, there 85% of all vineyards in Washington State are below 1,000 feet. Below 1,000 feet is sandy soils. Above 1,000 feet is generally volcanic soils, generally cooler, later ripening, generally middle to the northern part of the state. And within the Charles world, our rosé vineyards are all above 1,000 feet. Actually, same goes with our whites. We don't want more than 12% alcohol, and yet we want to hang the fruit into late September, and that requires a pretty cool spot. So that's the setup for Charles & Charles. Initially, all Syrah, and at this point there's Syrah, there's Grenache, there's Mourvèdre, there's some Cunoise, there's some Cinsault, there's some Cabernet Sauvignon, all direct to press. 2019 was an exceptionally cold vintage, which was sort of out of cycle. Generally, we've been having these progressively warmers, but it was super cool. It was a really late wet spring. It did get hot midsummer, and then by September, just got into the 50s and really never got above that. And as a result, the color is paler. It's a bit more savory driven. There's always a lot of citrus and cherry. There's always this sort of lavender rose petal quality, and probably this year there's even a bit more of that herbal quality. I think it's pretty dynamite. You'll see the label for 2019 has evolved a bit. We decided to call out Charles & Charles more clearly, and to make it to line it up with our red program, where we're now calling out Charles & Charles very specifically. But these are sustainably farmed vineyards, high elevation. Of course, we can talk more about Washington attributes, I guess, on the red wine. Brad, is that the next slide?
Yeah. So I had Brennan.
Okay. So Brennan, yeah. So of course, Charles. Everybody knows Charles, right? He's one of the most dynamic winemakers in the world, certainly in Washington. He involved in a lot of projects. Brennan is our day-to-day winemaker who runs Charles's program and our program in the cellar. Incredibly talented guy. Used to be the head winemaker at St. Michel. I've learned a lot from him, and he's I can't say enough. I hope everybody gets a chance to meet him at some point. A real point of inspiration.
Hey Charles, so that vineyard, we went past the label, and we're at that high elevation with it looks like, I don't know if that's a Columbia River.
That is Columbia River, yeah. That's so that's the ancient lakes. That's where the majority of probably 70% of the Charles & Charles Rosé comes from. Not that particular vineyard, but that general area. So it's this bench above the Columbia River. It's pretty wild area where it's there's a lot of access to water through the river, but it's a really dry area, desert-like, frankly. And so you have these vineyards in these sort of improbable location surrounded just by tumbleweed. It's one of the most unusual wine growing regions that I've come across.
The soil looks
So
chalky.
it is chalky. So that particular vineyard, great, yeah, limestone. Well, there's some limestone there. That particular vineyard is quite chalky. That's exactly right. They're generally speaking, the ancient lakes area is generally thought of as they refer to as ancient soils. That's ancient lakes, and it volcanic, sort of decomposing volcanic soils. But that particular site is super chalky. Really interesting vineyard.
And then the Columbia Valley picture there with the vineyards on the other side of the river. That's great. And then Goose Mountain.
Goose Mountain, yeah. So with our red program, so we for the first several years, all we made was rosé. And at a certain point, as I started learning more about the state, and Charles and I are like, well, we got to make a red wine too. What should it be? And back in the Rutas days, we made rosé and we made Cab Syrah blends. And Charles had been making Cab Syrah blends for a long time. And as we thought about what to do, Cabernet being king in Washington, but also it is the latest ripening grape within the state and a cool vintage, particularly if you're trying to hit a sub $15 retail price point where you need to hang a certain level of crop. Cab doesn't, some vintages always get to the point of ripeness that you're hoping and dreaming for. Syrah ripens really early and always ripens beautifully. It's why Washington produces Syrah so well. And so we thought the combination of Cab and Syrah was, we both had great history with, and was the blend that would make the most interesting Washington State red wine consistently year to year. So on a warm year, the blend could be even more Cabernet, and on the warmest years as much as 80%. On a cool year where the Syrah is more interesting, there can be as much as 45% Syrah, I think, is the peak. So it's always been less than Cab, but it plays a really important role of bringing this soft, luscious, spicy, broad fruit quality. And the other thing that's interesting is we like really long post-fermentation macerations. We like to, once the fermentation ends, we like to keep the wine on its skins for as long a period of time. And with Syrah and Cab sort of being framing the vintage, we can bring in the Syrah pretty early and have that 30-some days in the tank. We drain it off, press it. At that time is when Cab's coming in, and then there's, since that's the end of the vintage, that can then really have no pressure for how long it stays on its skins. But that's, wines, I mentioned earlier, native yeast fermentation is something we're big believers in. It's something Charles has been doing for a long time. Charles's single vineyard K Syrahs are well regarded around the world. And our goal with Charles and Charles was to follow those same sort of practices for how he makes those single ton fermentations of high-end Syrah, but trying to do it on scale. And one of the things that I love about Charles and Charles was Charles has loads of wine brands and business, and I'm involved in all sorts of projects myself. And when it came to Charles and Charles, there was never the pressure to sort of have a business to make money. The goal was always to learn something, to push the limits. And if we weren't pushing limits, why bother? And so we really had this ease of experimenting. And so over the years, we have been able to achieve large scale native fermentation. That's very unusual on large scale because it's native ferments are tricky. They stop, they start, they need help along the way. We like stems, including stems in large batch fermentation is very unusual. And we realized that we can do that. Doing long post fermentation macerations is very typical for high-end wine, but something that's generally not done for our price point, and it really adds a texture and a seriousness that we love, and we would never really done that if we just set about this project in a normal way. We've just always pushed the limit. So Charles has been amazing. Charles is, I've learned a ton from. He's a real visionary, and same goes with Brennan. We do have, there's a photo, I think, of me in a Malbec vineyard. We make
the Northridge is the picture we're on, and it looks like you're dropping a lot of fruit.
Yeah, we had, so that was last year when it was a really cool vintage. So we were trying to advance ripening. So a bunch of fruit was dropped. This is at about 1,200 feet. It's called the North Ridge Vineyard. There are 2 rows of Malbec and 1 row of Cab that we pick together and co-ferment together. We're doing this, in this case, it's only 400 cases total production. So it's tiny. So we do it in the 1-ton fermenters, and it is, in this case, it is all destemmed. So it's whole berry, but it is native, and it's on the skins for close to 60 days. And then it goes into a mix of ages, French barrel for close to 2 years before we put it in a bottle for 9 months before we release it. It's following very much what Charles does on his K program. And it's, there are a lot of similarities with Eastern Washington and Mendoza, both climate-wise, both in the soil types. In this case, it's alluvial sand over ancient soils, which is the sort of predominant Ucla Valley soil profile. Malbec is a variety that's really working well in Washington and being planted all over the place, actually. So I expect we'll see more and more.
We have just the bottle shots of the single vineyard Malbec on the screen here with the scores that you've received from it. So
I'm going to have a sip of mezcal.
Go for it. Can you share with everybody virtually?
Del Maguey Tobala, which was in my back pocket every day, every moment of the Cadillac tour last year. Anytime I had a moment of tiredness or whatever it might be, this fortifies.
Jazz from Jersey is just chimed in. Future possibilities and working in mezcal. Yeah, very good.
So then I think all we have left is
Shatter.
Yeah,
let's go in. You want to go into Shatter?
Sure. Yep.
Very good.
Shatter is a project that Joel Gott and Dave Finney started in 2009, 2010. I mean, the quick version of the story was David sold The Prisoner. He was in the south of France. A friend of his suggested that he head up to this town called Mory, which is in the Roussillon, just over the border from Spain, French. So this is French Catalonia, technically. It's a hot, dry valley just north of the town of Perpignan. And Dave was blown away with these short little old vine Grenache vineyards planted in pure rock. The rock in this case is black schist, and he was so excited he bought 200 acres and got back to California and encouraged Joel to join him in a project that they called Shatter. Grenache is a varietal that tends to shatter around the world. It has high tendency to shatter. Shatter is a viticultural problem in the spring when the clusters are developing. If there is a weather event like too much wind or too much rain or hail or some nutrition deficit and the forming cluster doesn't develop right, it results in fewer berries per cluster. And so you'll, rather than a tight cluster of berries, you'll see this loose cluster with missing berries. That's a sign of shatter. And again, Grenache shatters in couleur is what it's called in French. And in Mory, where all this fruit's grown in the spring, it's super windy, which is why if you show Brad the vineyard shot, they're really low to the ground. The vineyards are. They're not up on trellising, and that the idea of that is to keep it out of the wind. So but anyway, there is a every year there's a certain amount of shatter, and Dave loved that because fewer berries means more concentrated fruit, which means bigger, richer wines, which is what Dave loves. So in 2017, Dave sold. So Joel and Dave created Shatter and made the wine together for many years. 2017, Dave sold his remaining California brands to Gallo, and they wanted him to focus on those projects and exit any partnerships. And Joel and the Trinqueros asked me to get involved with Shatter at that time, and in that I'm in France all the time, and loved what they were, loved the potential there. Obviously, I said yes. How do you say no to that? I jumped all over it before they even completed the sentence. And there's been a little bit of shift in how we are approaching things. I wanted to show the schist element more clearly. So in order to do that, we've been picking a little less ripe. I find if we pick too ripe, all you'll get is the fruit. You don't get the kind of meaty, irony quality that is the defining character of schist. We've been backing off on the amount of oak use. At this point, it's all just 3-year and older barrels and we age half of it in 3+-year-old barrels. The rest is in tank. We did move to all native fermentation. We are doing extended time on the skins post fermentation. We're sort of following a lot of the same protocol we do in Valerias and in Washington, but certainly different results because it's different fruit and different place. And so you'll see the wines definitely have more structure. They're meatier. I think they're more. They recognize place more. I feel as a producer, our job is to show to display the varietals that are involved, but also very much the place that the wine comes from, and that's the soil, and also to a certain extent the people that are involved. These sort of my goal across every project. You don't want too much personality. You don't want it strictly soil. You don't want it strictly about varietal correctness. It's that combination of all those three things that I think about.
Charles, we've got the 91 score from the Spectator, and then we'll go on to Valerias.
Yeah, so Valerias, just back to that, these are just, so the Shatter Les Galets are just my two favorite rows from within the La Jacine program. All whole cluster, all native fermented, 60 days on the skins, went into neutral barrel for a year before we bottled it and sat in bottle a while, and then released. It's just 400 cases. It was, this is Gallet. So in this case, it's just Riverstone Vineyard. I think you have a couple of shots of this sort of dramatic vineyard site where no soil, just rocks. Those are called Gallet, and the Châtelet Gallet is from that spot.
Looks like ankle breakers is what it looks like.
Totally. So that's a long start, speedy finish. I can't say enough how thankful I am to have all of you as friends and partners and be in this great industry. And I can't wait to get on the market and get back in the wineries and see everybody again. And this is an imperfect way to present, but it's best we got. And so thanks for hanging in for this conversation.
Yeah, there was one other question as we kind of transition into Barry Wisp. Barry, I'll let you, I'm going to stop sharing and let you take control. There was a question about Malbecs from Washington compared to Mendoza. What would you say would be difference?
What's a cool thing that I didn't mention is there has not been phylloxera in Washington State. There has not been phylloxera in Mendoza. Both cases planted on their own roots. They express really, really similarly. Joel and I produce a wine, the show, in Argentina, and so I have the opportunity to see Malbec, and both the Uco Valley, Mendoza, and the behavior is really similar. It sort of blows me away, and so I'm not giving you a good answer, but the soil types are near identical. I would say in Mendoza, like Luján de Cuyo, it's a bit warmer climate, so I think you're getting a bit more red fruit. You're getting a bit more, perhaps a touch less structure, unless you're bringing yields down really low in Mendoza. But overall, I think if the vineyards are treated right, and if you look strictly at the Uco Valley versus, say, the Northridge Vineyard, similarities are bananas.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Charles, for sharing all of that. I really appreciate it, and the amount of detail as well. I think that's appreciated from everybody. If there's not any other questions, we'll roll into our trivia game where everybody can contribute. Barry, why don't you go ahead and share your screen, please?
All right. Thank you, Brad. Thank you so much. Once again, thanks for joining us, everyone. And Charles, thank you so much for your time this morning. It was truly special. So thank you so much for your time. Well, I think a lot of you are familiar with our game show, and to capture some of the highlights of today's presentation is everybody's favorite wine game show, Vine to Mind. And if you haven't done so already, you need to, if you want to play along with the game, you don't need to. You can still